The weight of gold. She's nothing but a burden now, Richard. We can't let sentiment cloud our judgment about what needs to be done. Those words, spoken by my own son about me, changed everything. I'm Eleanor Hartwell, 74 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed family meant something sacred. I was wrong about many things, but mostly about how easily love can transform into calculation when money enters the picture. What happens when the people you love most start seeing you as a problem to be solved? Let me take you back to where this story truly begins, not with my son's betrayal, but with the moment I realized I had more power than anyone expected, including myself. Because sometimes, the people who look powerless are the ones holding all the cards. It all began in the lawyer's office. The law office smelled of old leather and expensive cologne. I sat in the mahogany chair across from Mr. Whitmore, my late husband Charles's attorney, trying to process what he'd just told me. Charles had been gone for 8 months, and I thought I understood our financial situation. I was wrong. But what he revealed next changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. Mrs. Hartwell, your husband was quite deliberate about the structure of his will, Mr. Whitmore said, adjusting his glasses. The primary estate, the house, investments, and business interests all transfer to you with specific conditions. I nodded, though I felt lost. Charles had always handled our finances. After 47 years of marriage, I'd trusted him completely with such matters. The unusual aspect, Mr. Whitmore continued, is the clause regarding your son Richard. Mr. Hartwell was very specific that Richard would inherit only upon your death, and only if certain conditions regarding your care and treatment are met. What kind of conditions? Mr. Whitmore pulled out a sealed envelope. Your husband left detailed instructions. He was quite concerned about Richard's relationship with his wife Victoria and their financial pressures. And this is where the truth begins to surface. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, had always made her ambitions crystal clear. She wanted the lifestyle that Charles's textile fortune could provide, and she'd married Richard as her pathway to it. What I hadn't realized was how thoroughly she'd influenced my son's thinking about what constituted appropriate care for an aging mother. That evening, I sat in my garden reading Charles's letter. His handwriting was shakier than usual. He'd written it during his final weeks, but his meaning was unmistakably clear. A final letter, carrying a husband's warning from beyond the grave. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means Richard and Victoria have begun pressuring you about your living arrangements. I've watched them carefully these past months, and I'm afraid they see your inheritance as their salvation from the debt they've accumulated trying to impress their social circle. Richard borrowed heavily against his expected inheritance to purchase that house in Beacon Hill. Victoria's spending on clothes, jewelry, and entertaining has far exceeded his salary as a junior partner at the law firm. They need your money, Eleanor, but they also need you out of the way. I've structured the will to protect you. The money is yours unconditionally, but Richard will inherit only if he can prove he's provided you with respectful, appropriate care according to your own wishes. If he tries to force you into institutional care against your will, or if he attempts to manipulate you into signing over assets, the inheritance goes to charity instead. Don't let them make you feel like a burden, my love. You are the strongest person I've ever known. Use that strength. Forever yours, Charles. I folded the letter carefully, understanding now why Richard and Victoria had been so unusually attentive since the funeral. Their frequent visits, their concerned questions about my health, their subtle suggestions about planning for the future, it all made sense now. Suddenly, their kindness didn't feel like love. It felt like strategy. I didn't realize it then, but the real battle was just about to start. And this is where the mask begins to slip. 3 weeks after my meeting with Mr. Whitmore, Richard called to invite me to Sunday dinner. Victoria's making your favorite pot roast, he said, though I suspected Victoria had never made pot roast in her life. Their home in Beacon Hill was everything Victoria had dreamed of. 4 stories of 19th-century elegance in Boston's most prestigious neighborhood. What Richard's letter to Charles hadn't mentioned was that maintaining such elegance required money they didn't have. A beautiful house, hiding an ugly truth. I arrived to find not just Richard and Victoria, but also Dr. Patricia Morrison, a geriatrician I'd never met, and James Fletcher, an elder care specialist. The staging was obvious, even to someone who'd spent her life trusting people's good intentions. "Mother, we wanted to talk to you about some concerns," Richard began after we'd settled in the formal dining room. "Victoria and I have noticed some changes lately." "Changes?" Victoria leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "You seem more forgetful, Eleanor. Last week when we called, you didn't remember our conversation from the day before." This was news to me. I kept detailed notes of all my phone conversations in the journal I'd maintained for decades. No conversation had been forgotten. Dr. Morrison consulted her notes. "Mrs. Hartwell, cognitive decline is nothing to be ashamed of. It's quite common at your age, and the good news is that early intervention can help maintain your quality of life." "I wasn't aware I was experiencing cognitive decline," I said carefully. "That's often how it begins," Dr. Morrison replied smoothly. "Patients don't recognize the early signs themselves." Richard produced a folder of documents. "Mother, we've researched some excellent facilities, places where you'd have professional care, social activities, everything you need." And there it was, the real agenda. I looked at the brochures. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Community, Peaceful Meadows, all expensive private facilities, all with programs that allowed families to transfer assets for protection. "These all seem quite costly," I observed. "That's where the asset protection programs help," James Fletcher explained. "You transfer your estate to the facility, and they guarantee lifetime care. No more worrying about finances or unexpected medical expenses. A guarantee of care, or a guarantee of control." There it was, the carefully orchestrated plan to separate me from Charles's inheritance. Create a narrative about my declining mental health, present institutional care as the only responsible choice, then convince me to sign over my assets for my own protection. "This is quite a lot to consider," I said. "I'll need time to think about it." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, Eleanor, but these facilities have waiting lists. We'd hate for you to miss this opportunity while you're deliberating." A threat disguised as kindness. That night, I sat in Charles's study surrounded by financial documents I'd never bothered to understand. The textile business he'd built was worth far more than I'd realized. The investments his advisors had made over the decades had grown substantially. The life insurance alone was enough to solve Richard and Victoria's financial problems permanently. But Charles had protected it all. The will was ironclad, designed to ensure I maintained control of my assets and my life. Richard would inherit generously, but only if he earned it by treating me with dignity and respect. I never thought I'd have to investigate my own family, but the truth wouldn't stay hidden. I spent the next month doing something I'd never done before, investigating my own family. I hired a private investigator, a sharp woman named Margaret Chen who specialized in financial fraud cases. What she discovered was both illuminating and heartbreaking. Richard and Victoria owed over $200,000 in credit card debt. They'd taken out a second mortgage on their house. Richard had borrowed against his partnership in the law firm. Their monthly expenses exceeded his income by nearly 40%. Their life looked polished. Their finances told a different story. More troubling were Victoria's activities. She'd been researching elder care attorneys, not to help me, but to find legal ways to have me declared incompetent. She'd consulted with 3 different geriatricians about the process of obtaining guardianship over an aging parent. Margaret also found something interesting about Dr. Morrison. She'd been involved in 2 previous cases where families had successfully gained control of elderly relatives' assets through questionable competency evaluations. Both cases had later been investigated by the state, though no formal charges had been filed. "Mrs. Hartwell," Margaret said during our final meeting, Your daughter-in-law has been very thorough in her planning. She's not just hoping you'll voluntarily enter assisted living. She's preparing to have you declared incompetent if you don't cooperate. I thought about Charles's letter, about his warning that Richard and Victoria saw me as an obstacle to their financial security. He'd been protecting me from something even worse than I'd imagined. If they thought I would surrender quietly, they were about to learn otherwise. I decided to force their hand. I called Richard and told him I'd like to discuss their concerns about my health and living situation. Could we meet at my house this time, with Dr. Morrison and Mr. Fletcher, so I could ask questions in comfortable surroundings? Richard agreed immediately, probably thinking I was ready to capitulate. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, all of them wearing expressions of practiced concern. I served tea in Charles's favorite china, playing the role of the gracious elderly lady they expected. "I've been thinking about what you all said," I began, watching their faces carefully, "about my memory problems and the need for professional care." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Hartwell. Acknowledging the need for help is often the hardest step." "Yes, I imagine it is. That's why I've been keeping such detailed records of our conversations." I pulled out my journal, the one I'd maintained meticulously for the past decade. This wasn't just a diary, it was my shield. "For instance, Victoria, you mentioned last week that I'd forgotten a phone conversation. But according to my records, we haven't spoken on the phone in 3 weeks." Victoria's practiced sympathy flickered. "Well, perhaps I misspoke about the timing." "Perhaps." I turned to Dr. Morrison. "Doctor, I'm curious about your evaluation methods. Do you typically diagnose cognitive decline without conducting formal testing?" "Well, preliminary observations can indicate." Because I had comprehensive neurological testing done last month with Dr. Sarah Whitfield at Massachusetts General. Would you like to see the results? The room fell silent. I produced the medical reports showing perfectly normal cognitive function for a woman my age. Richard found his voice first. "Mother, why didn't you tell us you'd seen another doctor?" "Because I wanted to understand what was really happening here." I looked at each of them in turn. "Richard, you're in debt. Victoria, you've been researching how to have me declared incompetent. Dr. Morrison, you've been involved in questionable competency cases before. And Mr. Fletcher, your asset protection programs have been investigated by the state for elder abuse." The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Richard spoke. "Mother, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but—" "I know exactly what I've discovered." I pulled out Margaret Chen's investigation report. "I know about the credit card debt, the second mortgage, the money borrowed against your partnership. I know Victoria has consulted 3 attorneys about guardianship proceedings. I know Dr. Morrison's history with dubious competency evaluations." Victoria stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, Eleanor." "No, Victoria, you're trying to help yourselves to my inheritance." I remained seated, keeping my voice calm. "But here's what you don't understand. My husband anticipated exactly this scenario." I pulled out Charles's will and read aloud the conditions for Richard's inheritance. Their faces went through a fascinating progression of emotions. Shock, panic, calculation, and finally, a cold anger I'd never seen from my son before. "You can't be serious," Richard said. "Dad couldn't have known." "Your father knew you very well, Richard. He knew how Victoria's ambitions might influence your judgment. He knew you might see my inheritance as the solution to your financial problems. And he protected me from exactly what you've been planning." Dr. Morrison gathered her papers. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about my role here." "No misunderstanding, Doctor. You were brought here to provide a medical opinion that would support their narrative about my declining competence. Unfortunately for everyone involved, I'm perfectly competent." After they left, I sat in my garden thinking about power and love, about how money could corrupt even the most fundamental relationships. Charles had given me more than financial security. He'd given me the knowledge that I was worth protecting, worth fighting for. The reckoning arrived in the weeks after, when consequences stopped being abstract. Over the following weeks, I watched Richard and Victoria struggle with the reality of their situation. Without access to my inheritance, they couldn't maintain their lifestyle. The house in Beacon Hill went on the market. Victoria's expensive clothes and jewelry appeared less frequently. Richard looked haggard, aged beyond his 52 years. Part of me felt guilty for their distress. This was my son, the boy I'd raised, the young man I'd been proud of when he graduated law school and married his college sweetheart. But that young man had been replaced by someone who saw his mother as a financial obstacle rather than a person deserving of respect. When love becomes a ledger, something has gone terribly wrong. Victoria left him 6 months later. The divorce was swift and brutal, with both parties desperate to claim assets that didn't actually exist. She moved to California, presumably to find another wealthy family to marry into. Richard called me the day the divorce was finalized. "Mother, I need to talk to you." We met at a small cafe in Cambridge, neutral territory, where neither of us had the advantage of familiar surroundings. Richard looked terrible. The past year had stripped away his polished lawyer exterior, revealing someone I barely recognized. "I'm sorry," he said without preamble. "I'm sorry for what I tried to do, for how I treated you, for letting Victoria's ambitions corrupt my judgment." I studied his face, looking for the calculation I'd grown accustomed to seeing there. Instead, I found something that looked like genuine remorse. "Why, Richard? Why did you think it was acceptable to manipulate me that way?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because I was desperate. Because I'd made so many bad financial decisions trying to give Victoria the life she wanted. Because I convinced myself that you'd be happier in professional care, that it was really about your welfare rather than my convenience. And now I understand what Dad saw. I understand why he structured the will the way he did." Richard looked directly at me for the first time. "He wasn't just protecting you from me. He was trying to protect me from becoming someone who could treat his own mother like a problem to be solved." We sat in silence while I processed this admission. The old Eleanor would have immediately forgiven him, would have rushed to comfort her son and help him rebuild his life. But Charles's letter had taught me something about the importance of consequences, about the difference between forgiveness and enabling. "Richard, I appreciate your apology, but apologies don't undo the damage or address the underlying problem." "What underlying problem?" "You still see relationships in transactional terms. You're sorry because your plan didn't work, because Victoria left, because you're facing consequences. But I don't hear you acknowledging that I'm a person with feelings who was hurt by your actions." Richard flinched. "Of course I know you're a person, Mother. You're my mother." "Am I? Because for the past year, you've treated me like an asset to be managed, not a person to be loved." The conversation continued for 2 hours. Slowly, painfully, Richard began to understand not just what he'd done, but why it was wrong. Not because it hadn't worked, but because it had treated me as less than human. Change can begin only when we see the humanity we've been ignoring. Redemption rarely comes clean. It arrives scarred, fragile, and real. That was 3 years ago. Today, as I write this story in my garden, I can see Richard working in his small apartment's kitchen, preparing dinner for both of us. He moved into a modest place in Somerville after losing the Beacon Hill house. He took a job with a public interest law firm, representing seniors in elder abuse cases. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Our relationship will never be what it was before. Too much has been revealed, too much trust has been broken, but it's become something different, perhaps something more honest. Richard no longer sees me as his mother who exists to love him unconditionally. He sees me as Eleanor Hartwell, a woman who deserves respect and consideration. I never moved to assisted living, though I did make some practical changes to my living situation. I hired a part-time companion, Mrs. Patterson, who comes twice a week to help with shopping and household tasks. I installed safety features throughout the house. I created detailed healthcare directives and financial powers of attorney, all designed to ensure that if I ever do need care, it will be provided according to my wishes, not someone else's convenience. Most importantly, I learned something about my own worth that I'd forgotten during 47 years of putting everyone else's needs first. I learned that being loved doesn't require being convenient. I learned that real family relationships are built on mutual respect, not just obligation. Charles's final gift to me wasn't just financial security. It was the knowledge that I had power to make choices, power to demand respect, power to shape my own future. For too long, I'd handed that power over to others, assuming that love meant never asserting my own needs or preferences. The real redemption was not Richard's, it was mine. Wisdom is not what we gain from books, but what pain carves into us and we later offer to others. Last month, I received a call from Margaret Patterson, my part-time companion's daughter. Her mother had been caring for Margaret's grandmother, who was beginning to show signs of dementia. The family was struggling with questions about care, about independence, about when intervention becomes necessary. Mrs. Hartwell, my mother says you might understand our situation. We don't know how to help Grandma while still respecting her dignity. I invited Margaret to tea, and we spent the afternoon talking about the difference between protecting someone and controlling them, about how to distinguish between necessary intervention and convenient management, about the importance of including elderly family members in decisions about their own lives. The hardest part, I told her, is that sometimes love looks like letting people make their own mistakes, and sometimes it looks like setting firm boundaries about what kind of treatment you'll accept. Margaret nodded. My mother said you stood up for yourself when your family tried to make decisions without you. How did you find the courage? I thought about this question for a long time. I realized that courage wasn't something I needed to find. It was something I needed to remember. I'd had it all along, raising a child, supporting a husband through various crises, managing a household and community responsibilities for decades. I'd just forgotten that I was allowed to use that strength for myself. Sometimes, the courage to stand up for yourself is simply the memory that you've done it before. These conversations happen more frequently now. Other seniors in my community, adult children struggling with aging parents, families trying to navigate the complex balance between care and control. I've become something of an informal advisor, helping people understand the difference between protecting elderly relatives and protecting themselves from the inconvenience of elderly relatives. The truest legacy is not what we leave behind in money, but in the lessons our choices force others to learn. This morning, I received a letter from Victoria. It was the first communication I'd had from her since the divorce 3 years ago. She wrote from Lowe's Angels, where she'd married a film producer and was, according to her letter, living the life I always dreamed of. But the letter wasn't about her new success. It was an apology. Eleanor, I know this comes far too late, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I tried to do to you. My new husband's mother is 81 and fiercely independent, and watching him navigate that relationship has shown me how wrong Richard and I were. We treated you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be respected. We assumed that our convenience mattered more than your dignity. We were so focused on what we thought we deserved from your husband's success that we forgot you were the one who'd actually earned it through 47 years of partnership. I hope you're well. I hope you're living exactly as you choose to live. You deserved better from both of us. Victoria. I showed the letter to Richard during our weekly dinner. He read it quietly, then folded it carefully. Do you think she means it? He asked. I think she means it now. Whether she would have meant it if her circumstances were different, I don't know. Richard nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that myself, about whether my apologies are genuine or just another form of manipulation. This was the kind of conversation we never could have had before the crisis. Richard's willingness to question his own motives, to sit with uncertainty about his own character, was perhaps the most meaningful change in our relationship. What do you think? I asked. I think they're genuine now, but I also think they might not have been if Dad hadn't structured the will the way he did. If I'd gotten what I wanted, would I have ever acknowledged how wrong I was? The question hung between us, unanswerable but important. Legacy is rarely about wealth. It's about the questions we leave behind that keep shaping those who remain. The inheritance of freedom. Next week, I turn 75. Richard is throwing me a small birthday party, nothing elaborate, just a few close friends and neighbors. Mrs. Patterson will make her famous lemon cake. Margaret Chen will come with her family. We've become friends over the past few years. Dr. Whitfield, my neurologist, will stop by with her partner. Strange, isn't it, how a simple guest list can tell you everything about the life you've built and the respect you've demanded. It's a small gathering, but it represents something powerful. A community of people who see me as Eleanor Hartwell, not as someone's elderly mother or problem to be managed. People who respect my autonomy while caring about my welfare. Richard asked me recently what I plan to do with Charles's inheritance eventually. It's a fair question. I won't live forever, and the money should serve some purpose beyond just maintaining my independence. I'm setting up a foundation, I told him, for seniors who are facing pressure from their families to surrender their autonomy prematurely. Legal aid, advocacy services, education about elder rights. Richard smiled. Dad would have loved that. Yes, he would have, but more importantly, it's what I love. It's what I want to do with whatever time I have left. This is what I've learned in my 74 years. Love without respect is not love at all. It's convenience disguised as care. Real love requires seeing people as they are, not as you need them to be. It requires accepting that others have the right to make choices you disagree with, to take risks you wouldn't take, to live lives that don't revolve around your comfort or expectations. Charles's greatest gift to me wasn't the money he left behind. It was the reminder that I was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth loving exactly as I was. Not as a convenient version of myself that caused no trouble and required no consideration, but as Eleanor Hartwell, a woman with opinions and preferences and the right to live according to her own values. Epilogue: The Weight of Gold. I'm writing this story because I know there are others like me. Women and men who have spent decades putting everyone else's needs first, who have forgotten that they have the right to assert their own wishes. Adult children who love their aging parents but struggle with the fear and inconvenience that comes with family responsibility. Family relationships are complicated, made more so by money and fear and the assumptions we make about what we owe each other. But at the heart of it, all should be a simple principle. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their age or dependence or inconvenience to others. The weight of gold is not just its monetary value. It's the way wealth can distort relationships, create expectations, and turn love into calculation. But gold also has the power to protect, to create security, to enable choices. Charles understood this when he structured his will. He gave me not just money, but the power to demand respect. He showed Richard that inheritance comes with responsibilities, not just benefits. He created consequences for treating family members as obstacles rather than people. I hope my story encourages others to examine their own relationships, their own assumptions about care and control, about love and convenience. I hope it reminds people that getting older doesn't mean surrendering the right to make your own choices. Most of all, I hope it shows that it's never too late to remember your own worth, to stand up for your own dignity, to insist on being treated as a person rather than a problem. After all, we teach people how to treat us. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is set boundaries that protect not just ourselves, but the character of those who claim to love us. The truth is, power shared with wisdom becomes love. Power wielded with selfishness becomes betrayal. But power reclaimed with dignity, that becomes transformation. And transformation, I've learned, is possible at any age. Eleanor Hartwell, Boston, Massachusetts, written in my 75th year. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.